So, the last huge impact that imperialism is going to have on the locations that it takes over is going to be an identity and a cultural change. And both of these, by the way, are going to have rippling effects even till modern day. And, the first here impact is going to be through education. And you want to put down here next to education, you want to put down that this was a bonus of imperialism. This was a bonus of imperialism because for getting a Western education, for many, it creates a completely and totally new identity where they now have, at least for them, in their minds, the almost magical power of literacy. When you have so many of these groups for a variety of different reasons not living within a literate society, being able to read and write is going to be magical for them. It's going to be transformative. Um, it will allow them to escape obligations like forced labor. It will give them access to better jobs and also social mobility and elite status. I mean, for them, education is going to be a way out. And many people, for this reason, are going to embrace European culture. But you want to put down here next to number two, put like in parentheses right here, put a however, because the however is going to be that this created a cultural divide between them and the vast majority of the population. Again, in the chapters where we're looking at decolonization, the creation of these modern nation states out of these colonies, that divide is going to be a big divide. And that divide is going to cause some massive, massive problems for some of these places here as well. For many of the Western educated elite, they're going to see colonial rule as a path to a better future. At least. Um, in India, you're going to have some of these people, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later on. You're going to have some of these people that will use this education and will use it to create new nationalist groups like the Indian National Congress, for example. However, hopes for renewal through colonial rule are going to be disappointed very, very quickly. You want to put down here next to B underneath number three that the Europeans didn't treat their subjects as equals. The Europeans didn't treat their subjects as equals. In time, this causes the educated elites, in time, this causes the educated elites to lash out against their colonial powers, to lash out against their colonial powers. It's going to be these Western educated elites that are actually going to form some of the first resistance groups and some of the first nationalist groups within these colonies that will work to get rid of the Europeans. Gandhi, by the way, is going to be a really, really great example of this. With religion, the Europeans are doing what the Europeans do, and they are spreading Christianity. And they spread conversion to Christianity now, this time in New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and also non Muslim Africa. Again, keep in mind that Christianity, even at this point, is not going to spread to any place that already has a literate world religion. The missionaries don't even make an attempt. I mean, they may open up schools and hospitals and those types of things to try to attract people in, but you're not going to have the large scale conversion to Christianity here. Christianity is going to be attractive, especially for many within Africa, for a couple reasons. One, it's associated with modern education. It's going to be the missionaries that are going to be establishing churches and schools next to or within those churches. So a lot of non-Muslim Africans who realize that education is going to be key for a better life for themselves and also for their children will become attracted to Christianity, specifically Methodism, during this time. Because of the power of education. The Christianity is also going to give opportunities to the young, poor, and also many women. I mean, a lot of these missionaries do come in initially as benevolent organizations. Now, with that being said, the Christianity that is spreading here is a little different. It is going to be Africanized, um, to the point where, and you want to put down here next to number four, you want to put down it was almost a hybrid. It was almost a hybrid. So you definitely have some different parts of African traditional tribal faiths kind of creeping into Christianity. In India, it just simply doesn't necessarily spread as widely. However, it does lead to some religious reform movements and also some intellectual discourse on things like Hinduism, where you have intellectuals and reformers who are trying to define Hinduism. Now, part of this is to create a national identity that is also going to be locked into a Hindu identity that, of course, they'll use later on. But at this point, it's how are we defining Hinduism? What are the specific features of this? And not only will this definition of Hinduism be used to define who is an Indian versus who is English, but the new definition is also going to help distill a clearer sense of Muslim as a distinct community. And you want to put down here next to C, and this is a little bit bigger note. Do you want to put, please, here that this will also bring, we're putting it right here next to C underneath number five. This will also bring a profound religious slash political divide, which will become more pronounced as time goes on, especially when there is a call for Indian independence. Part of this larger identity impact that imperialism is going to have is that notions of race and ethnicity were central to these new ways of belonging. Like, for example, by 1900, some African thinkers began to define an African identity, which is going to unite for the first time by the experience of colonial oppression. That, even though colonial oppression will be varied, there still is that basic, we're getting kind of screwed over by the Europeans. Some ultimately here are going to argue that African culture and history had characteristics valued by Europeans, that they have these complex political systems that the Africans in particular need to be reminded of, that the Europeans have spent so much time degrading what is going on within these African kingdoms and these African empires, where we actually have the definition of these African collections going from, empires and kingdoms to tribes and villages. And the monarchy going from kings to chieftains or some lesser title, and it's really what the Africans want to kind of get back to in order to create that African identity. Some therefore are going to praise the difference between Africa and Europe here as well. And in the 20th century, these ideas are going to reach a much broader public. In fact, once we get into the period of decolonization, this type of idea is going to be throughout not only Africa, but throughout a lot of the colonial world here as well. And for most Africans, the most important new sense of belonging was the idea of tribe or ethnicity. Um, the ethnic groups were defined here much more clearly thanks to the Europeans. You want to put down here next to A underneath number 4, just put in parentheses here, social Darwinism. The Europeans were obsessed with categorizing everything and everyone, and these new notions of African identity are going to kind of build off of that. It will cause some problems later on, rather than creating a larger whole sense of like this Pan-Africanism, it will go back to being very, very regional and local. But some Africans will undoubtedly find the ethnic identity useful. You want to put down here next to B underneath number 4 that this limited the Africans' ability to unite in a larger sense. This limited the Africans' ability to unite in a larger sense. And again, in a later chapter in decolonization, you'll see how we go from this concept of this whole African, this Pan-African identity, to something that is far more regional and local. And all of that has to do with the very small and tight definitions that the Europeans have placed within the African continent, especially when they're starting to define people by ethnic group.